Good afternoon. It is Wednesday, February 14th. I'm wearing pink because it's Pink Day for Sharsheret, which is a group that helps Jewish women with breast and ovarian cancer. So that's your Tikkun Olam announcement of the day. Can everyone hear me? Susan, can you hear me? Oh, thank you, Jeff. We're going to close the door. So I just said Rabbi Sarada is in Antarctica for 2 weeks. I will be taking the class for 2 weeks. In 3 weeks, I'm not exactly sure who's going to take it. And then if we have to cancel it, I'll let everybody know on the 28th. And then we'll definitely have a final one on the 6th. And if we have to add another one, we can do that as well. So, as any good teacher, we'll just take a quick review of, everything. We were talking about mandated, what's a mandate? So, you can see here that established by Article 22 of the League of Nations, Covenant, June 28th, and you can see all the different mandates in Africa. And then, of course, Israel is, right next to Egypt. Now, the interesting thing for me, for anyone, I believe, is that what did mandated Palestine look like? And I mean, it was the contortions they went through for this map. I just don't know. I don't know how they would think that it would be successful. And this is what the map looked like. So you can see that between, so here, right, you can see my little pointer, Jerusalem and Tel Aviv, that is what is now the West Bank. I'm sure some of the settlers refer to it as Judea and Samaria, a biblical reference. And you can see in some points, it just goes down to such tiny margins. Again, on the left of this picture, that's Gaza, still there. And you can see that just the problems of this map. There is a thing called the Green Line, and I think Rabbi talked about it for a minute last week. And it's green because somebody actually took a green marker, and some people in Israel, the Green Line is just the partitioned parts, and the people in Israel. Some people have made conscious decisions to buy property within the Green Line. That should there be a two-state solution, the West Bank, at this point, I have no comments about Gaza or who's gonna lead there or govern there. But so some people make a conscious decision to live in the Green Line. I will tell you this, when you buy places outside of the Green Line, West Bank, it's cheaper. There's more space. There's more, you get more bang for your buck, I guess. Of course, eventually it will be a bang because of the settlers, and they get into it with the Palestinians. Yes.
When you buy something, who gives you a title? How is that?
That's a good question. I'd have to look into that. Because I'm pretty sure now on the West Bank, it's probably Israel, certainly within the Green Line, it's Israel. And we'll go into the War of Independence that's coming up. And then the 6-Day War in 1967 is when they got all that. Yeah.
Tel Aviv's within the Green Line.
Oh, yes, yes,
And,
yes.
Yeah, that's on the,
Haifa,
yeah, okay.
Herzliya,
And Judea and Samaria are all,
not,
they're all part of the West Bank,
yes. Judea and Samaria is the West Bank.
and then,
They call it Yehuda v'Shamron because that's it's a biblical name. So you know, if someone comes to talk to you and says, I want to talk about Judea and Samaria, that's a right-wing person.
Right.
It's not unlike what type of kippah they wear, what they're dressed in. You can tell immediately what they're talking about. I have a lot of anecdotes. My husband's best friend sent him a letter and he wanted to know what I thought about it. And this person was criticizing Bob Kraft, who owns the Patriots, and my husband's from Boston, his friend from Boston, and said that, what Bob Kraft was doing by promoting this Don't Hate Jews campaign. He's been very vocal. He's sent his players to Israel. I commend him for all that charitable work that he does. And this letter to the editor, and it got into an article, was criticizing him and going on and on. So within 2 clicks, I found out that this man was from Jewish Voice of Peace, which is an ultra left-wing organization, which Vanessa, you can take it up with other people, think is an anti-Zionist, almost anti-Semitic organization that does not believe in Israel. And I said, don't listen to, I came out very strong and opinionated, and Arthur goes, well, it's a good thing my wife, doesn't have any strong opinions. Sandy.
Well, like you say, if somebody says Judah and Samaria, right away, if you're a lefty and center left, you probably have nothing in common with them as far as it. I mean, it's a very definite statement, as Vanessa said. And if you're in Israel and they say, may ever kav hayarok, which means over the green line, if that's how they explain the West Bank, then you know that they're a leftist and you may have something in common with them.
Right.
It's very definite the way people talk about it.
Yeah. We left off with the mandate. We left off, we haven't really gotten to the declaration, their Declaration of Independence and the War of Independence. And I wanted to back up and look at different types of Zionism. I think today, when you say Zionism, it can be an argument point, and people can take a very critical look at it. And I should have started everything with, I have a romantic relationship with Israel. I grew up, I remember the 6-Day War. I remember sitting in synagogue during the Yom Kippur War. I remember Entebbe. And everyone here on this, in our class, has those memories as well. My personal children do not. And listen, I've spent a lot of time and money sending them to Israel and educating them, but they have a different relationship. And in fact, in about a month, I'm going to Israel on a mission. It's not really a vacation. I expect it to be very sad. We're going to be near Gaza, and they call that area the envelope of Gaza. So we're going to be down there, and it's called mifgash, with a meeting. A mifgash is a meeting, and I'm going with educators. So this is central to my personal identity, and I consider myself an Israel educator. And since October 7th, things have changed. On October 8th, if you had told me we're teaching a course on Israel and the war would still be going, I wouldn't have believed it. And in fact, we added this class because the war was still going. And we think it's so important that we educate and people know what's happening. Also, I won't do it today because I didn't do a list, but I love to read, and I have some nonfiction books for you, and I have some fiction books. I'm a big fiction reader. about Israel and some nonfiction books, which I think you'll find interesting and teach you and your family. And I think that some of the things we have seen online in the paper, the genocide, the colonization, all of that patently not true. And, we need to educate ourselves so we can talk about that.
Vanessa,
Yes.
something just dawned on me. Does this mean anything to anyone in the class? Ma'alot. Nobody talks about it. They talk about Hebron,
Yeah.
the different attacks. It isn't
Yeah.
just Gaza. Ma'alot, I lived in Israel,
Yeah.
in Beersheba at that time.
Yeah.
My kids were in high school. What happened at Ma'alot? It was an Israeli high school in the north. And the Palestinians came down from the north and other Muslims, maybe from Syria, and they attacked this high school with guns and rifles. They killed a lot of teenagers. No one seems to remember that, or they didn't.
I'll have to look into that.
I mean, it was a terrible
Yeah.
thing.
There's many things, Dear Yassin, Sabra and Shatila, there's many different things that have happened in Israel that we may not be aware of. And I think it's upon us to educate. So now everybody in here knows what the green line is. BDS, boycott, divestment and sanctions. That's another thing everyone in here should know about, that people call for BDS against Israel. And it's up to us to educate ourselves, and it's up to me to lead that education. So I would like to start with, there's 6 types of Zionism. First is political Zionism. I'm going to tell you what they are, and then I'll go back. Political Zionism, labor Zionism, revisionist Zionism, religious Zionism. Rabbi talked a little bit about Rav Kook last week, and cultural Zionism. And diaspora Zionism. I don't know that I'll get into it. Cultural Zionism is my personal favorite, and we'll talk about that in a minute. So, who is the poster child for political Zionism? Of course, it's you're all going to know the person, but it's Theodore Herzl. He was the one who wanted a state in Israel. He, saw the Dreyfus affair and reported on it. And Emile Zola also reported on it. I mean, it was a giant thing. There's a fabulous book, and it's a fiction book, but it talks all about the trial. And I'll bring the title next week, because we read it in my evening book club. It shows what was happening at that time. Because to get Dreyfus, they were spying on one another, and they had fabricated all of these things about him, which of course were not true. But Herzl really wanted a state. When it was brought to the Zionist Congress, people also brought up Uganda, and he probably could have gone either way, but I think that they decided it has to be in Palestine, the Jewish homeland where Jews had lived through all this time. And he wanted a state because of the anti-Semitism and a pogrom. Pogrom are violent riots against, the Jews. And I think what happened on October 7th was a pogrom. And you hear different things, it was the Holocaust of pogrom? No, that was genocide. But these random acts these acts of violence towards Israelis or Jews, pogrom. And of course, we're most familiar with them in Europe, Eastern Europe. And that's, I'm sure if I took a show of hands here, 80% of the Jews in the States are Ashkenaz, 20% are Sephardic, and our Ashkenazi relatives came from Russia and Poland, and, then within them, that, Litvak, they have different, and of course, the Germans came first. So, but that's where the pogroms happened. And he wanted, finally, the Jews must return to their ancient homeland, the land of Israel. And the Uganda plan was rejected in 1905. Herzl never saw Israel. There's a beautiful, in Israel, Har Herzl, Herzl Mount is the military cemetery. When you go to Israel, usually you visit there, and he has a beautiful, he was buried there, and all the soldiers can be buried there. And there's some, most of the presidents were buried there, not Moshe Sharet. And he's buried in another cemetery that I went to in Tel Aviv, and his headstone is a long diatribe, literally in Hebrew, of why he didn't want to be buried there. That's really only in Israel. All right, so that's one. Two, labor Zionism, and I think labor Zionism is the one that we're really familiar with. Golda Meir, David Ben-Gurion, and the kibbutz movement, socialism. So I do have some pictures. So my two favorite pictures of Ben-Gurion are there we go. People don't always, I just think this is, this is a very, this is a fascinating picture of him on the beach in Tel Aviv. He lived on a kibbutz. He actually, I think, is buried on that kibbutz, Sde Boker in the Negev. And so he also not at Har Herzl. And, but my other favorite picture, that is Ben-Gurion with my great Uncle Bill.
Oh.
And Uncle Bill, quick anecdote, he sold drapery. And when they went to go sell the store many years after he had died, they found boxes and boxes of bullets. So my cousin said, well, I didn't know Uncle Bill hunted or whatever. And they said, no, those were weapons to send to Israel. And, the labor Zionists did a great job. Golda Meir came here and raised a lot of money. Ben-Gurion, and obviously, great Uncle Bill had given a lot of money, and that's why he was visiting him on Sde Boker, and he had a little tete-a-tete with him. And again, for me, that's something to be proud of, that my family thought that was important, and it was all, and nobody knew about it. He had kept it like under the table.
I mean, you call it, but it was under David Ben-Gurion that when we started, came in and we talked about Zionism, pushing out the Palestinians. It wasn't during that time.
So,
If they were
right.
the people who were living in Palestine.
Yeah. So again, and I have a fabulous book called The Lemon Tree, which talks about a tree in a house that belonged to Palestinians, then belonged to Jews, and then
It's a great movie too.
yes, it's a great movie. So I have a colleague who says, when you take minutes, when you're at an organizational meeting, you write the history. So whoever, when you take minutes at a meeting, you're writing the history. History. So I think, and if you look at the history books from those times, whoever wrote the history, you'd find two, very different, different accounts, at least. Right. Because, and kind of, going down the middle, I think what happened, in 47, the Arab Mukhtars, and everybody listened to them. They were, the religious people, said, just leave your house. We'll be back in a couple of days. I do think the Israeli army, there's, Deir Yassin, as I mentioned, was a terrible, a village where the Israeli army did murder people and,
It
people
wasn't
really
the
don't,
Israeli, it was not the Haganah, that was the Irgun,
yeah,
and there was, what was his name? What was
Begin.
Begin's group.
So just again,
Lefty.
Yeah. the Haganah became the IDF, Israel Defense Forces, Haganah, to defend. And there was a right-wing group of that, the Irgun. And if you remember the movie Exodus, that was Paul Newman's uncle. And he's the one who blew up the King David. I mean, the Irgun did some terrible terrorist acts. There's no two ways about that. And the IDF though, and listen, we've seen on television now what's happening in Gaza. I, Vanessa, do think that the Israeli army tries to be moral, tries not to kill as many civilians as possible. But the fact is that there's been tens of thousands of people in Gaza who have died and who have been bombed. And we have a cancer Shabbat, and I spoke about I'm a cancer survivor. And I said that when the war broke out, this was already November, when the war broke out, I kept thinking, wow, look at, there's going to be cancer patients in Israel who can't get treatment because the hospitals are overrun and everything that's happening. And so I read this speech to my kids, my personal kids, and they're like, yeah, Mom, you got to talk about Gaza too. And they were right. There are people, who knows, if you were getting cancer treatment in Gaza, I don't know what the hospitals look like. But we also know that Hamas, of course, has been in the basement of many of them. Jen.
So I'm totally lost.
Okay, sorry.
So let's go back. We were talking about the different.
Zionism, right.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
Okay, what I don't understand, when you talk about political Zionism,
Yeah,
and you kind of gave us
who the
you know,
people,
who the
yeah,
people were.
yeah.
What's the ideology of political versus
Mhm.
what was the first?
The second is labor, political versus labor.
Okay, so what's the difference?
Right.
Okay, so the political, I
Right.
understand.
Right.
And that's when I think of Zionism,
Right,
I always think of the political
right.
Zionism. Okay, what's the ideology of the labor
Right.
Zionism? How does that differ? What makes that different from?
From political. I also want to step back a hot minute. Israel is governed by the Knesset. There's 120 seats. You have to have a majority for your government to govern. These political parties, these types of Zionism, then are reflected in the political parties. I think now not as much, but political Zionism is like, we got to have a state.
I get that.
Labor Zionism, one of the things that was manifested was kibbutzim. Socialist. We're going to be a socialist country. We're going to, and we really have not had a labor. We haven't had a labor prime minister. A rabbi brought it up last week. Since my kids, Bibi's been in for so long. And he is from, a more right-wing party. And I think, I'm gonna have to do a little, what? Oh, I'm gonna have to do a little thing to see who exactly, who is the infant of the Likud party. I know who Menachem Begin, was the first leader of the Likud party that became prime minister.
Vanessa?
But he also made peace with Egypt. I think because he was that right wing. Because I think somebody from labor, I don't think the right would have trusted their judgment or whatever. So it's manifested now in the political parties. And listen, there's a few Arabs in the Knesset as well. You know, some of the people on Bibi's cabinet, this Ben Gvir, Schmoltrich, they're terrible. They're racist and they're not good for Reform Jews. And they are both from Sephardi, you know, not Ashkenazi or Mizrahi. And that part of the population in Israel has grown exponentially because they have more children. You know, the Ashkenazi are not unlike, you know, our millennials or whatever who get married, but, you know, don't, you know, have 2.5 children.
Vanessa,
So,
Someone's
what?
trying to.
Oh, sorry. Oh, my God. Okay. Oh, Susan, go ahead.
oh, thank you, Vanessa. I just wanted to very quickly mention when you were talking about David Ben-Gurion, I do remember very distinctly, I think it was after the 6-Day War, that Ben-Gurion said, if we settle these lands, it will come back to haunt us. And how right he was.
Except that he was a very big proponent for settling the Negev, which is within the Green Line. And I think both he and Golda Meir said things like, there is no such thing as a Palestinian. And I don't think you would hear a current day prime minister say either of those statements. Obviously, there's Palestinians.
Well, you know, my son was there. So, and he said, as much as he saw such horrible, horrible things and on the kibbutzim that he was on, and but when it came to the West Bank, he thought what the settlers' behavior was in the West Bank was really appalling.
Agreed. Totally, completely agreed that our army has to go and protect those settlers, and it's the regular army. Those kids are between 18 and 21. Can you imagine? And they're making these life and death decisions, and their frontal lobe isn't developed. And I mean, that's the truth, and it's very hard to say. Sarah.
Yes, I just wanted to make a comment on labor Zionism.
Uh-huh.
I got married into a family of Russian Jews. They were socialists. They knew Golda Meir in Wisconsin. And at the Passover Seder every year, we sang the Internationale, which was the labor anthem. And that they were not really observant Jews in terms of keeping kosher, and they were socialists.
Absolutely. And I think Rabbi and I were just discussing another thing that Ben-Gurion said. In the declaration, which we'll look at more closely next week, and there is no mention of God. The only mention of God is Tzur Yisrael. Tzur, it means rock. So you could mean the rocks of Israel or God as a rock. There's different, and you know, it's in a prayer that we sing every Shabbat before we take out the Torah. And I think that there were, you know, the labor Zionists, also we're going to get to cultural Zionists. You know, the whole religion thing was not part of their lives or meaningful to them. The statistics used to be, and I need to, you know, that 90% or 95% of Israel was secular. The Hebrew word is chiluni, and that the other 5% was dati, which is religious. Because of the coalition government, both Labor and Likud, when they went to make a coalition, this religious parties were they needed them to make the coalition. And what did the religious party ask for? To be in charge of education, housing. I mean, they were in charge of things that could change the face of Israel. So, and, right before, BB, this last time, when they had that, it was, Yair Lapid and, Benny Gantz, and it just didn't work out. They could have had a chance to go with some Arab parties, but it just wasn't, I don't think, palatable to the rest of the parties as a whole. So I think that, the socialist part, whether it be kibbutz, Jay and Sandy.
Probably the obvious thing, but if we go back before 1948, after the early part of the century, we had the Russian Revolution. We had Lenin wrote two really important pamphlets, State and Revolution and the Right of Nations to Self-Determination.
Mhm.
And the whole question of self-determination was a big issue, not so much in the United States because we're relatively isolated, but out on the other side of the world, a lot of people were talking about. There was a time not only of Lenin and Trotsky, but also Rosa Luxemburg in Germany. Socialism and the right of people to determine their own existence was a major question. Look at Fiddler on the Roof. They even had that there. So there were people that were first and foremost socialists. And if you were a socialist, you were typically either an intellectual or a labor socialist, just in terms of how you make yourself in the family. And they wanted to be part of that movement for their own way. And they were not at all friendly towards those people that did it because God said this land was ours. So there was a real tension between those two groups.
One of the first countries to recognize Israel was Russia. And why? They thought they'd go socialist. They were looking for, like, okay, we're going to support this because there's a lot of Russians there and they're socialists and we're going to be successful. Obviously, that didn't happen, but that is the reason for that vote. There's also, I'll try to find it for next week, a great picture from a Zionist Haggadah, and they have the 4 sons. And who's the evil son? It's got to be labor Zionist because the evil son is the religious one.
I hope it was somebody was Stalin.
Right, and then who's the smart son is the big kibbutznik with the muscles, and he's tilling the land.
Right.
So, so you can learn a lot when you look at Haggadot and see how Jews are portrayed. All right, here's the answer. Yes, Sandy, sorry.
This is a little known story. I doubt if any of you have heard it. Ben-Gurion, in his desire to settle the Negev, he and Golda both went to the Negev. She went to her daughter's kibbutz when she got old and sick, and he went to stay locally. But he had a plan. He took people out of the jails. He emptied the jails of Israeli criminals, not people who did things against the state, petty criminals, impoverished people, maybe that
White
stole
collar.
or something. They were mostly Sephardic Jews that were in the jails in Israel at that time. And he gave them a town. That town is Mitzvah Ramon, which is a beautiful place in Israel, in the Negev. And we went there with Rabbi Taylor years ago. And I know that the rabbi from Amsterdam also was there and took a group there. Today, there's a beautiful hotel there. But nobody, when they go down
There's
to
a
Israel-
gorgeous hotel there.
Right. They all went down to the Negev, went through it quickly and went to Eilat, and then they flew back. Very few groups ever stopped in Mitzvah Ramon, which is really interesting. So I make Aliyah, and my husband's offered a job right away in Mitzvah Ramon. So I said, I don't know if I could live there down. I've never lived in the desert. I've got 3 daughters, So he takes one daughter and moves to Mitzvah Ramon. And I go down to visit him and I see in the supermarket there's one supermarket, all these people that still look like they just got out of the jail. The women are walking around in slippers and nightgowns. They do not have a dress. in
Right,
public.
well, you know what, it's an interesting,
Well, I just have to finish this real
Right.
quickly.
2 sentences,
It was,
go.
it was so terrible looking. I thought I could never live in this town. A beautiful town with these weird people that look like they got out of prison. Some were blind in one eye.
And now it's a beautiful tourist spot.
But now I went back there after many years when we were there as tourists. And I went into that supermarket and I couldn't, it was better than Mariano's.
Right.
Gorgeous food.
And that, you know, the changing face of Israel. So the third Zionism, and this is actually, I answer my own question here, revisionist Zionism, founded by Zev Jabotinsky, 1925. And they said, they insisted on the Jewish people's right to sovereignty over the entire biblical land of Israel. And that's the West Bank. And that's where you have, you know, the clash between Labor and Likud, because Likud, the face of revisionist is then Menachem Begin. You know, Zev Jabotinsky, and then the revisionists opposed the labor Zionist socialist vision for the Jewish state. They argued that there must be room for other ideologies in a future state. And I think after Jabotinsky's death, Menachem Begin came to embody revisionist Zionism. And Begin was the first political figure that the party could look at and say, I'm going to vote, and also the first, we used to say a WASP in Israel is a white, Ashkenazi, Sabra, somebody who was born in Israel, with protexia. Protexia means you know somebody in the government who can help you get whatever you need. So this is the first guy who's not a WASP, who's not this white Ashkenazi guy. And so, and that rift and that political climate, because Netanyahu, you can even see by his name, he also really appeals.
What year was that? When was?
Begin
Yeah, when he came.
to power. I'm gonna do a quick Google, but I mean, he was there. I'll tell you, because he signed, I'll tell you how I know. He signed the accords with Egypt, and I was still in college, 1981.
Okay.
Maybe 79, maybe 80, but it wasn't 79. I was in Israel. It was 80,
Because when I was there in 72, he
Yeah.
clearly was not.
Yeah, hell no,
Well,
right.
And it was, okay.
I spent my junior year in Israel, 79, 80. 79 is when they gave back Sinai. And we climbed Mount Sinai on Sukkot, because we had vacation. And it was going to be the last pilgrimage holiday. The 3 pilgrimage holidays are Sukkot, Pesach, and Shavuot. And we were on Mount Sinai is much bigger than Masada. And these old people were like, going around me, and it was quite the trek. And, and then after that, Sinai is part of Egypt. And we used to go down to Dahab and Nueva. I mean, there's
Sharm el-Sheikh.
Sharm el-Sheikh, right? All right, back to Begin. Here it is. In 79, he made his own piece with Egypt. And again, I can, see in my head the Menachem Begin, and it was Clinton, right? Who was the American president in 79?
79,
Carter. So it was Carter, Begin, and Saddam.
And we cried in Israel with
Yeah.
joy. We
With
walked
joy,
through the streets with flowers that day that they were together.
Yeah.
in Jerusalem.
The religious Zionism, and we talked a little bit about Rav Kook, and Rabbi and I said something about Rav Kook. He goes, "I wish he was still alive today."
When you what the revision, you said they want all biblical.
Yeah.
That would also be the religious group too, wouldn't it? Because
Not necessarily, although, I mean, there's a couple of religious groups. So you have the Haredi guys who don't even believe in Israel. In fact, I saw something on the news and I saw a black hat guy at a Palestinian Free Palestine thing. I'm like, what the hell are you doing there? But, you know, they don't believe in the state of Israel because the Messiah hasn't come. Then you have the settlers who are just, you know, crazy for the land and are, you know, very observant. And those two don't always, those
they're
two
not
don't
part of
mix.
the culture.
Yeah, those two don't mix. So, but this Rob Cook said, he spoke romantically about how the land was inseparable from the soul of the Jewish people. And although the secular Zionist pioneers did not share this religious theology, Rob Cook saw them as critical partners. And that obviously is not happening today. And I think we've seen that, whether it be in the United States or there in the 50s here, you know, people were not, you would wear a kippah, maybe you'd put it under your hat. And today people are militant about showing how religious they are. And a good example of this is at Passover, you're supposed to burn the chametz that you have in your house. So in West Rogers Park, they have these like bonfires to see who can have the biggest chametz fire. And it's like, who can out religion the other? If you watch Thistle, or what was the other one? Right, there was another one with Shira Haas, Unorthodox, where she leaves. And they go into a kitchen at Passover and everything is on tin foil. Like, I think, you know, we just try to out-religious each other, and it wasn't like that. You know, there was just more conversation, and more leniency and more, you know, people, you know, go down that highway. And the norm in the Orthodox community is to send your kid to Israel for a year after high school. And I think that gap years, I'm all for it. And when you go to Jerusalem, it's full of American Orthodox kids. All you hear on Ben Yehuda is English. And more of these families in this denomination, if we want to call it that, are moving to Israel. And that just changes the complexion. And you know, I'm not exactly sure how they would vote, but certainly I have some friends in the Orthodox community who were very, very supportive of Trump because, you know, what he had done for Israel in their eyes. That's a story for another time. So we have political revisionists. I love cultural. Cultural Zionists wanted to create a new Jewish spiritual center in the land of Israel. They hoped this spiritual cultural hub would inspire the rest of the Jewish world. There were in Europe cultural schools. They were called Beit Sefer Tarbut. Tarbut is culture. And these schools, they wanted to get people ready to come to Israel. They taught everything in Hebrew, not just Hebrew. They teach science and math. And I had a teacher once who was in a Tarbut school, I think here in the States. And her Hebrew was amazing because she had studied as a kid in Hebrew, science, math, geography, everything. And, you know, today we look high and low for Hebrew teachers. And, you know, what our kids have the time to learn, I think sometimes, you know, doesn't do them well. And then they go off to college and they're confronted by either, you know, very evangelicals, and those people may, for the most part, do know, you know, their Bible, and our kids don't. So I think that the culture that for me, the cultural Zionism, you know, you're not right, you're not left, you're learning about Israel. And the person, the founder is Achad Ha'am. And that means one people. Chad ha'am, am is people. So he changed his name. I'll find what his name was. And this center, the spirit of Judaism will radiate to the great circumference to all the communities in the diaspora, or in the diaspora, the government, to inspire them with new life and to preserve the overall unity of our people. And I just, there's something very beautiful in that for me. And there are many Jews in some Jews, when it was Palestine, they embraced this. Another cultural Zionist was Eliezer ben Yehuda. And he single-handedly rejuvenated Hebrew as a modern language. And he wouldn't even speak, he was Sephardic. I don't know what their language of choice was. In his home, and his wife kind of had it with him because they could only speak Hebrew at home, and they started this new language, and a lot of things you had to give names to modern things. And they established, his wife Deborah established the world's first strictly Hebrew speaking household in almost 2,000 years. So I mean, there's something to be, I think there's something to be said about that. I'm sorry, what? Well, Mechonit. I don't know what that, or auto. There's a lot of things that there's an academy that if you want to name something, like most people in Hebrew say pajama, but there's a Hebrew name for pajama that nobody uses. A cell phone is called a pelephone. Pel is miracle. It's like a miracle because, the handheld phone. So there are, yes, Andy.
The two, though, that are funny, we used to think that radio is radio and television is television.
Yeah.
I mean, they never came up with another word for it.
And look, in today's Israel, almost everybody speaks English because you have to learn it in school. When you go to secondary education, most of your textbooks are in English. And this is where, the Palestinians are at a deficit because their schools aren't as good, and I'm not sure if they're teaching English there or not. One of my favorite Arab Israeli authors, Sayed Kashua, he's very funny. He came to the U of I. Who is he friends with? All the Israelis. And he sent his children to a Jewish Israeli school. And the story he tells, which I think is hilarious, is that he comes home and he hears his daughter on the violin practicing what song? Hatikva. And he's like, my daughter is playing Hatikva. And the wife says, okay, then show her some Arabic music and show, talk about your people and your culture. And then he says, at the end of the evening, the daughter's like, I have to practice Hatikva. I gotta go. And he has some great conversation with another favorite author of mine, Edgar Garrett, who is he's probably younger than I am. He has some great short stories about Israel and what's happening there, and they had a great dialogue. I don't know that they've had a dialogue in the past 6 months, and that would be interesting to see if they could. Questions before I rumble back on? Okay, so other, the diaspora Zionism and these are names that everybody in this room knows. I'm sure if we play trivia, either with the kids in the school, I think my personal children would know Louis Brandeis because he was a Supreme Court justice. But I don't know that they would know Henrietta Zold. Henrietta Zold was the founder of Hadassah, and they have sent many millions of dollars to Israel, Hadassah Hospital. What they've done there is amazing. I think that you know, again, in this day, as things progress, you have to change and change with the times. With women who are working and don't have as much time to volunteer, you have to kind of regroup and decide what the mission and vision is for your organization. And they still send a lot of money to Israel. They still, you know, they reach out. The Hadassah magazine is online. They reach out by email, and they still have been very successful. I used to volunteer. My kids went to Schechter, and I used to volunteer and dress up as different things. So I came in once, and I was holding a cigarette, and they go, "Oh, are you Henrietta Zold?" I go, "No, I'm gold in my ear. Henrietta Zold wouldn't smoke a cigarette. Come on." So they're like, "You're right, Vanessa. You're absolutely right." Because I had a gray wig and a long skirt on. I could have been anyone. Yes, Sandy.
Many Arab women who lived in the West Bank and around Jerusalem for years went to Hadassah Hospital. They had babies for problems that they had, gynecological problems, until the year it was spread that if you go, they would tell the men, don't let your wives go because Jewish doctors will do things to your wives so they can't have any more children. Now, the truth of it probably was some of these women didn't want any more children and went along with these doctors and said, do what you can for me. You know, maybe doing a hysterectomy or whatever, giving them birth control stuff. That was a very difficult time because up until then, Hadassah Hospital, that was a wonderful way of getting along with the Arab population.
I mean, I
And
think,
many doctors and nurses, even today, are Palestinians that
Right.
work there.
I do think that, you know, the hope for the future you can see in the hospital where in Israel they treat Arabs, Palestinians, and they have the most up-to-date medical procedures and all of that. And it's very hard to watch what's happening in Gaza with the hospitals, but I think it's irrefutable proof that Hamas has been underneath. One thing that I wanted to read for you today is a beautiful poem. It's called A Silver Platter, and it's by Natan Altman. And yes, Natan, it was Nathan Altman. His Hebrew name is Natan Altman. He was an Israeli poet, playwright, journalist, translator. He never held an elective office. And he was born in Poland in 1910, and he died in 1970. He was only 59. I always think of him as old. He's 59 in Tel Aviv. And the state the state will not be given to the Jewish people on a silver platter, ran the saying, popularized by Chaim Weizmann. Chaim Weizmann was the first president of Israel. Ben-Gurion was the first prime minister of Israel, and Ben-Gurion made sure that the presidential position was ornamental. So I don't know that Chaim Weizmann liked that. And this is attributed to him by Haaretz newspaper, December 15th, 1947, soon after the UN decision to partition Palestine. So the partition was in December of 1947. The British left in May of 1948, and that's when the War of Independence began. The Palestinian Arabs call that Nakba. If you hear anyone talking about Nakba, they're talking, for them, it's a terrible event. And disaster. It's a disaster. But this is the poem by Natan Altman. And the land grows still, the red eye of the sky slowly dimming over smoking frontiers as the nation arises. Torn at heart, but breathing. To receive its miracle, the only miracle as the ceremony draws near. It will rise, standing erect in the moonlight in terror and joy. When across from it will step out a youth and a lass and slowly march toward the nation, dressed in battle gear, dirty, shoes heavy with grime, they ascend the path quietly. To change garb, to wipe their brow, they have not yet found time. Still bone weary from days and from nights in the field, full of endless fatigue and unrested. Yet the dew of their youth is still seen on their head. Thus they stand at attention, giving no sign of life or death. Then a nation in tears and amazement will ask, "Who are you?" And they will answer quietly, "We are the silver platter on which the Jewish state was given." Thus they will say and fall back in shadows. And the rest will be told in the Chronicles of Israel. Sorry.
What language is it?
Hebrew. It's in Hebrew. I could give you the Hebrew rendition. And I have it in Hebrew. But I think that, when, again, we have a couple minutes left. I think back about what's been happening in Israel and these young people dying. Yep.
And if I may, when you talk about silver, not just young people, one of the people who died is a woman named Vivian Silver,
Yes.
who's been eulogized by her community and by her children. She was the founder of Living Wage Peace. And one of the amazing things to see is how her friends and her family are committed to carry on her work.
Yeah.
Even
Yeah. I think, I'll have a lot more to report back in March. Seeing what's happening in the envelope, and usually in Israel, in Jerusalem, I went to visit right after the Intifada it was 2000, yeah. And they would blow up like a Sabara pizza place. They would put up, they would board it up, and 3 days later it would be open, it'd be cleaned and open. But that's not happening in the kibbutzim in the south. And I don't know what it's going to take, financial, physically and emotionally, to restore that area to what it was, because they were a lot of peaceniks who lived there. So, any other questions? I can bring you a list of books next week. And in our library, we have a lot of great books here. I think the one fiction book, Noah Tishby's, let's see. It's just called Israel.
there's a good book.
What?
Somehow, History of Zionism.
Yes, that's right.
This is kind of like.
Yes.
The Bible.
Right. Gil Troy also has one, and Daniel Sokach has a more, I'm going to say, left wing. His book is harder to get a hold of, and I haven't read it yet.
I'm listening to My Promised Land
By Ari Shabi.
And it's leaving me with a lot of questions and angst.
Yeah.
And I don't know if trying to where they come from.
Yeah.
I would love to hear another side of it.
Yeah.
Maybe we give you the name of another.
I can give you the names, some books. The unfortunate thing about Ari Shabi, for me, was that he was Me Too'd, and came out as, sexually aggressive against the interns and everything. So it's hard for me to suggest that book, but I did read it before he was.
Yeah, I didn't know.
I know.
But this is,
Like,
it
what are-
makes, the thing that makes me
Yeah.
just in the end,
Yeah, tell me.
is, well, with there were people living on this land. They don't have titles and deeds
Right,
and things like we do. But they lived, you know, generation after generation after generation, for going there over centuries,
yes,
having, you know, established their, you know, and yet, and because there really was no government that, or town hall to get a deed from. And, you know, there was an extremely, like, an exponential, more than exponential influx of Jewish people into the land of Israel. And you can't do that without displacing people who are on the land.
yes,
And that's what you know, and yes, they don't have a deed.
right,
They don't have, and yes, you know, the way the mandate was handed down to Israel,
right,
but they have a moral, there's some moral obligation. And that's what I'm having a hard time wrapping my head around.
right,
Because even if you have a two-state solution, you know, yeah, and then, you know, it's like you're telling, you know, and they were turned into, they were pushed, I mean, they became refugees from their own land, and
Right.
nobody wanted them.
right. Now,
So that's what I have a lot of hard time.
right,
I do too.
And it,
You're not
and it
allowed.
doesn't give them, it doesn't, you know, and so it does not give them the right
Correct.
to do what they do.
Yeah.
But it almost seems like if you have a two-state solution, and then we have the chutzpah enough to, you know, and you're right, if we win a war, when the United States took land in the war, it wasn't considered occupied land, it was the United States land.
right,
But in Israel, we call it occupied territory. And then, you know, how the settlement is built up. you
yeah,
know.
I think.
So I don't know, maybe you can give me some insight. as to how
No,
we
then
can
I just
reconcile.
have to say
Yeah,
that
Janet.
when Dee spoke recently, okay, the only thing he said that I agree with, that he's ever said.
Yeah.
That I agree with
What did he
is,
say?
you talk about a two-state solution. It would be so difficult in terms of what are the boundaries, what is the governance, how does that work? And all of the issues you're bringing up come to surface if you try to divide things up.
Yeah.
So that doesn't mean to me that you don't try.
Or you
Okay?
make,
Or
or you
have
try,
a-
or you
you
make,
talk
or you have
about-
a one-state solution where
Well-
they have autonomy over how they can govern.
Well,
themselves.
that-
So that's
that's-
allowed.
that becomes a two-state.
Sandy,
solution.
one last comment and then I'll stay.
I feel very strongly about this. I don't know what the answers are. We all have opinions. And this is a very painful time for all people here. But I don't think there will ever be peace. The two-state solution or not a two-state unless somebody, UN, the WN, whoever, demands that the textbooks used in Gaza and in the West Bank are changed because they portray all Jews as evil people looking like apes. If you would see the textbooks that these kids have been brought up with, this whole generation or two.
Listen, I'm also sure the settlers textbooks portray Arabs as
Absolutely.
evil as
Absolutely.
well.
Maybe the settlers, but my
Absolutely.
kids all went
No,
to school
yeah.
there, and they never learned anything bad
All
like
right.
that about
Um,
there.
Thank you all. I'll see you next Wednesday. Great to have everybody. Bye-bye.